Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This is the classic tale of ex-convict Jean Valjean and his mortal struggle to be a good person, despite the Paris Revolution of 1832 and Javert, the inspector that refuses to leave him alone. Naturally, I had to read this one because it won the poll that I put up on the channel of lengthy classics that I needed to get to, and boy was it lengthy. It is definitely the longest book that I've ever reviewed on this channel, and probably one of the longest books that I've ever read. Right up there, depending on how you count a book, I suppose. So what is this thing about? I'm assuming people already know the main storyline, so I don't feel inclined to give a spoiler alert on any of this. You have Jean Valjean, who gets out of prison and he's being cast down because of his ex-convict status, and it's the bishop that gives him a chance and says he's saving his soul. And Jean Valjean is determined to be a good person, but Javert thinks once a convict, always a convict, and you have the setup of the story from there. And there really aren't that many characters beyond that. You have Jean Valjean taking in Cosette as a daughter, and you have Marius coming in later, and the Thénardiers popping in. But it's amazing to me, like you basically work with those main characters and then a few side characters. But the bare bones of the book is pretty simple. So how does this thing get to be so massive? This is because not only did Victor Hugo like to place his reader in the setting of the story, he liked to place his reader in the background of the setting of the story. I imagine Victor Hugo reading a book and it saying, John walked into his house, and Victor Hugo saying, whoa, 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 John just walked into his house? What does the house look like? What's it made out of? Who built it? Was it John? Did John build his house? How long ago? And how does that relate to the socioeconomic status of the nation at the time? Take the beginning of the book, for instance. It doesn't start with Jean Valjean, it starts with the bishop. It starts with the town, because you need to have all that in place before you can even start talking about Jean Valjean. So not only does Victor Hugo go heavily into the backstories, he also goes on tangents, and they range from the Battle of Waterloo to the usage of slang to the backstory of convents. And in some parts, he's basically writing an essay on the benefits of socialism and what England and France and the rest of the world should be doing to help lift people up at the bottom. It's like you're reading about Jean Valjean, and then the chapter ends, and when you start the next chapter, suddenly everything has changed gears, and you have the author stepping in saying, Hi, I'm Victor Hugo, and I'm going to pause this story to talk about a very important subject. The sewers of Paris have a long and important history, and I will go into detail in it. The year was 1623, and ... and then 80 pages later, we get back to the storyline. So if you're reading the unabridged version, brace yourself for that. It's almost like he wrote Les Miserables and separately he was writing how France is and how France ought to be. And then he shuffled those two manuscripts together and then called the whole package Les Miserables. Sometimes it felt like Grandpa Simpson had taken over and I was waiting for Victor Hugo to get back to the storyline. Of course, that's assuming that Grandpa Simpson is a really great writer, because even in these tangents, Victor Hugo is very good at picking the right phrase to express a thought. And it does all revolve around this central idea of the lower class of people needing to be elevated. The book overall is a call to equality, and he is consistent on that point. Speaking of the great writing style, I'm going to share a couple of quotes that jumped out to me. What is love? I've met in the streets a very poor young man who was in love. His hat was old, his coat worn, the water passed through his shoes, and the stars through his soul. To love or have loved, that is enough. Ask nothing further. There is no other pearl to be found in the dark folds of life. The pupil dilates in darkness, and in the end finds light, just as the soul dilates in misfortune, and in the end finds God. There are a lot of great parts in this book, but my favorite part is when Jean Valjean is the mayor of the town. He's known as Monsieur Madeleine, and he finds out that someone is supposedly Jean Valjean and he's going to take the rap for him. And so Jean Valjean is struggling with what he should do about it because he made a promise to the bishop that he was going to be a good man, and so he's just grappling with this. Like, what does he think a good man would do? And in the book, it really goes into a lot more detail than in the movie or the musical, because he spends all night pacing around thinking it through, and the book gives you the insight to his moral reasoning. And the moral reasoning is fascinating because he's saying, I'm this mayor, by me being here, I get to employ these people. They're not going to starve. They're working. I keep them safe. I'm protecting them. I'm doing this great good for the community by being in my position. And if I were to give that up, these people would be in trouble. And he asks, like, is it selfish of me to have these moral standards that put other people's lives in jeopardy? And then he thinks about the convict. Is the convict really worth saving? If the convict is like stealing, what's good is it if he sacrifices himself just to save this guy who's probably going to steal again? But then he realizes that that's the same logic that the bishop could have used on him, and so he ultimately decides, I've got to take this man's place. I've got to come clean. And what I love about this is he has to take this carriage ride all the way up to where the hearing is happening, and he has to get there in time, otherwise it'll be too late. So he is morally obligated with this code that he's put upon himself to get there and to make his claim, to let it be known that he is actually Jean Valjean. On the way there, the wagon wheel breaks. And so he's stuck. He can't get up there. And so he goes to the nearby town and he talks to the guy and he says, I really need this fixed. I have to be someplace tonight. And the guy said, it's impossible. And Jean Valjean's, what if I do this? What if I do that? And the guy's like, no, there's no way. It's not going to work. And Jean Valjean is so happy because he can say, I tried. I've done everything I could possibly do to save this person, and it just didn't work. His conscience can rest because he did what he could do. But then someone overheard him talking to the guy about the wheel, and they volunteered, like, oh, I've got a wheel, what wheel you can use. And then so he is morally obligated, though he's fuming at this good-natured person for fixing his wheel. So he has to say, okay, all right, fix my wheel, even though I really don't want you to, and I really wish you didn't offer. I just love that. I love him like trying to think through this task of being a really good person. It's brilliant. I also love Thénardier in the book. He's a lot more intertwined with the story and moves the story forward in a lot more places than in the musical or movie. And also in the book, Thénardier is a lot worse, I think, than in the other adaptations. So I love the way Victor Hugo uses him as a plot element. So in the end of the book, you have Jean Valjean, who is about to die, and you see the path of his life and the overall arc of the narrative of the story. He was a lost soul. Someone saved him. He spent his life trying to be a good person, and as a result, he saved Cosette and he saved Marius from the barricade. So in the end, you have the wedding, the symbolic achievement of everything that Jean Valjean sacrificed his life for. And also in the book, I think it's symbolic of the solution to the overall problem and playing to this theme of love. And in the end, you have the defeat of Javert, the symbol of blind justice. There's a lot of symbolism in this book, so it would be a mistake to take all these things literally. I don't think Cosette and Marius is a realistic love story. Javert's not a realistic cop. Like, these are all symbols for the greater meaning, which I think Victor Hugo does so well in the book. So overall, I loved it. I feel like I've just hiked through a very long mountain range and now I've come back. But I have the sense of accomplishment and just having gone through so much of what Paris and France was like in the 1820s and 30s. This book is beautifully written, thought-provoking, and ultimately romantic and profound, despite the tangents. I'm still going to give this book 5 stars.